Hello, this is Kevin Muir. I've got a project that I've been writing about grandparents raising their children, a vulnerable population study. So let's get right into it. So this project, like I said, is about grandparents needing to raise their grandchildren. I wanted to take on this project because I recently had a patient who had a knee replacement surgery, and I found out that she had actually taken over custody of her 5-year-old grandson. And she also had a husband that had kind of an early onset dementia. So that kind of interested me in picking this up and thought that we'd talk about it a little bit today. So, what makes a population vulnerable? Um, Data shows an increase for depression and a decrease in psychological and physical well being in grandparents caring for their grandchildren. What are some other obstacles? Um, Grandparents' relationships and feelings toward their actual children may become strained because they're now responsible for taking care of those kids, and they have to monitor and maintain a relationship with the kids, even though they have to raise their grandkids. It's hard to even explain, um, but we'll keep going on. Here in Cache Valley, Utah, which is where I'm from, 1,900 children are living in a household that is headed by a grandparent. 700 cases include no parental involvement at all. The grandparents are the sole guardians for their grandchildren. In the state of Utah, 21,000 children are in the care of grandparents. In the United States, 2.5 million grandparents are the sole guardians responsible for their grandkids. International, there are some European countries such as Romania, Portugal, and Greece that are also seeing this trend of grandparents taking over the care of their grandchildren. So, what does Healthy People 2020 contribute to this? Two of the biggest social determinants of health that play into grandparents raising their grandchildren include economic stability and their education level. So, grandparents, the older generation, typically this population includes a lower education level and a lower socioeconomic status. So, moving on, contributing factors with specific concerns. Grandparents raising grandchildren. So, we're going to talk about the effects it has on the population. Grandparents are raising their grandchildren, so they have a heightened risk, a heightened, they're older, right? So they don't have the physical tools that they had when they were in their younger years, their 20s, their 30s, their 40s. They're chasing after grandchildren, um, and it puts more stress on their bodies, on their hearts, their joints, their organs, and that takes a toll. On one hand, it can keep them younger longer. On the other, it can wear out people that are already kind of run down. And that's just the physical side of things. There's also a complete mental side of things, psychosocial. As I mentioned on an earlier slide, this population is at a great risk for depression. Not only are they emotionally taxed with their grandchildren's needs, but they're having a strained relationship with their own children, because they're trying to figure out this new relationship. On the economic side of things, this population is usually closer to retirement, and they may put that off due to the economic demands that the new family is putting on them. Those grandkids have needs, school, food, etc. So let's keep moving. So what are some health concerns related to grandparents raising their grandchildren? There are several articles written about the root cause and gaps and discussions. The most likely root cause is related to the SDOH, including the lack of education and socioeconomic status that we talked about before. So let's talk about the psychosocial part of these things. Grandparents raising their grandchildren. We're, we're evaluating the population of elderly people raising their grandchildren. So, psychological effect and safety needs of grandchildren are being met. So, their normal needs of having a roof over their head, someone that's safe, that's taking care of them, that's being met now, where it might not have been under their parents' care. They're loved. Um, they feel like they belong, but obviously it's not their normal. I mean, their parents should be taking care of them, but sometimes the belonging is strained a little bit on the kids because they don't really feel like their grandparents should be raising them. They may feel a little abandoned by their actual biological parents and isolated from them. They might feel bad. They might have poor self-esteem because of what situation their parents put them in and having to be raised by their grandkids, and they might be embarrassed about that. So based on this evaluation, what is the overall anticipated functional level of this population? This population will need guidance with navigating the new role as parent, grandparent. So this is more the grandparent side of things, and the loving and belonging included with this adaptation. So these grandparents are going to have to kind of go out of their way to make these kids feel loved and accepted in their new environment. And overall, the functional level would include changing perspective on what retirement years looked like. Yeah, it's going to be a very different scene. It's not going to be sitting out on your rocking chair on the porch. It's going to be chasing after kids on that porch and doing a lot of the things that you'd normally do. Like I said, in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, they're going to be doing that in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. So what does this mean for their health outcomes for these individuals? So this population is at a higher risk of fatigue and depression, as well as other physiological factors, including feelings of abandonment, children's disillusion of the guardianship over the child, so them trying to reconcile that relationship with their parents versus being raised by the grandparents. Let's move on to the next slide. Specific concerns with grandparents raising grandchildren. Is this population at a higher risk of communicable disease or infections? No, not substantially. Typically, grandparents are fairly set in their ways at this point, are fairly stable, and have their life set up. So they're not typically at risk for communicable diseases. They are at a disadvantage immune system wise because they are more prone to ailments like the flu and other common viruses that younger people just kind of get over. It can take older people a little longer to recover from that. And let's keep moving on. So is this population at risk for non-communicable diseases or conditions? On this one, we'd say yes. So the explanation for that and what they might do to prevent or manage these conditions. So typically when you think of an elderly person, you don't really see them getting diseases. You see more of the after effects of something that's already been diagnosed. So an example would be Parkinson's or dementia or organ failure, something that might have been diagnosed in their younger years, their 30s, 40s, 50s, but the effects are starting to kind of take their toll on the body. So this population is more prone to having health breakdowns in this way. So, is this population at higher risk for self-care deficits or self-harm? Yes, the elderly population is actually the highest risk for suicide. Typically, this is because they're feeling a loss of normal function. They've had some sort of physical or mental setback, like a stroke, a hip fracture, something that changed their quality of life. So grandkids in this case might actually help with that, because these people feel like they have people they need to kind of stick around for, support, and help with. But it does come with more stress, possible depression, feelings that they didn't do a good enough job with their children, so they're having to do it again. The poor relationship that they have possibly with their children that they have to manage because they're raising their grandkids. What are some things we can do to mitigate this? They can physically, they can have a good regimen of exercise to try and keep themselves physically fit. They can have a good diet to make sure that they're getting all the nutrients they need. If they do sustain an injury, they might want to take part in some physical therapy or occupational therapy to help fix specific issues. They can reach out to their community for assistance, churches, or resources in the community that help with taking the kids off their hands for a few minutes so they can get some rest. And yeah, they can use those. So is this population, being grandparents, are they at a higher risk of being harmed by others or harming others? I would say yes, they are at a higher risk of being harmed. They are in an advanced age, at somewhat of a weaker physical condition. Their children might be upset with them that they've kind of assumed care of the grandkids, and there's possibility for abuse or mistreatment there. What can be done to mitigate this? They can talk to an attorney, provide proof of guardianship for the role change so the roles are clear. They can meet at public places for visitation rights for the previous parents and guardians, so they can still have a relationship with them, but they feel like it's in a safe place. They can also include other family members or counselors as needed to feel safe. And that is my presentation on grandparents raising their grandchildren. I'll just quickly go through some of the references, and thank you for your time. Thanks. Bye.